Hello and welcome back for lesson 4, how to make a negative. This is quite an important lesson if you are hoping to mix together your cyanotype process with your digital photography process or your film photography process. So once again, hi, this is me, artist Joe Howell. I have been working with Cyanotype since 2009. I work professionally as an artist. I do a combination of showing my own artworks and teaching people different photography techniques. If you want to find me, obviously do have a look for me on Instagram. That's at Art in Sunderland. And if you want to find me on Twitter, now X, find me at Maverick Art. I'm always really, really happy to converse with people if they want to, ask any questions about technique or process. I'm here for you. Also, I have a Patreon. If you're watching this on Patreon already, well, thank you very much. You are definitely some of my favorite people. And if you are watching this later on with the release on YouTube, what are you doing? Get on my Patreon. All right. Thanks a lot. How to make a negative for cyanotype process, lesson 4. Quite often I'll just use my phone when I'm creating negatives. I have a nice iPhone 14, so it's not the newest one. And I also have Photoshop Express downloaded onto the iPhone. This essentially gives me a full working suite for producing negatives, taking the photographs themselves. I would suggest that if you have the capacity to download Photoshop Express onto your phone or an app on your iPad or what have you, do it. It's a cheaper version of Photoshop Express because it's far reduced in terms of different things that you might want to do. However, it's actually still really comprehensive for doing this lovely crossover between digital and analog techniques. What will I need? Equipment. What's necessary? So, this is a recent collage that I created on my phone about Gertrude Bell, and it's for an exhibition in Washington Old Hall this year. And Gertrude Bell was known as the Queen of the Desert. What I've done is find images through the archive. I've then screenshotted them, mashed them together in the Photoshop on my phone, and then I've turned it into a negative and printed it out onto acetate, which then has meant that I can print beautiful Gertrude Bell on this old paper from a book about women we would like to emulate. This photo is quite funny. The reason that it has taken me so long to put out this lesson has been because there's been a comedy of errors. Essentially, my old Mac computer has given up, and that's the computer that still has the USB connection necessary for printing negatives. So, perfect timing, basically. No computer to actually print a negative at the moment. So, basically, what I've had to do is consider previous negatives that I've made and to show you the technique via that. Soon as I get my Mac fixed, we will be back in action. But you will need a camera or a smartphone, a printer, and that can be Laserjet or inkjet, a photo editing program or app, which we've just quickly discussed, suitable acetate or tracing paper, and patience. Throughout all art processes, you should exercise patience. More speed, less haste, as we say. A really important tip to remember is that your negative is only ever going to be as good as the photograph that you have taken. If it's a poor photograph and it is not got good depth, good focus, good contrast, then all of those problems will be even more apparent when you come to print it analog style. And that's because cyanotype in particular has this flattening effect to images. For cyanotype, I would suggest that sharp focus, clean composition, shallow depth of field, and it must look good in black and white. When you print it as a negative, you have reduced it down to a monotone print. So it doesn't matter how good it looked in colour, you need to make sure it looks the bee's knees in black and white. If you come from a photographic background, then a lot of this you probably would already be aware of in terms of composition and touch focus and so on and so forth. So if you're not sure how to create a good image, go and have a look on YouTube and find a couple of lessons that just give you a few hints about composition and the rule of thirds. As I mentioned, cyanotype flattens images quite a lot, so you need to think about how the image is going to convey depth. And you do that by very carefully using focus. So the image that I've chosen to use as an example is a lovely hawk moth on the lavender. And because it's a small creature, I'm up close to it, and that causes the background to drop away in the blur, which means I'm using a very small depth of field. In terms of creating a blueprint from this, that's what's going to give you the feeling of depth within the image. So be really particular about the image that you choose to work with in the first instance. What I love about this process is that it is so versatile. It just keeps throwing things at us to experiment with. Literally anything that you can take a photograph of can become a negative just using a simple Photoshop app. This can be quite freeing in terms of you might want to try out some fine art assemblage style things. You might want to try out mixed media. You might want to combine drawings and photographs. Or, for example, in this image, you might want to just very quickly put together a few bits and pieces. I call these transient collages, but actually they make really lovely negatives in their own right. I can't stress enough how beautiful and joyous it is to experiment that boundary between analog process and digital process. We're at a really unique point in history where it's all in your hands, it's all at your fingertips. So you might have realised by now that I use cyanotype in conjunction with a lot of varied techniques. It's the fine artist in us. I can't help it. I absolutely love painterly marks, smudges, accidental drips. Basically, most of the things that normal photographers would absolutely hate within their photography, I love because I come from a fine art background. And it doesn't mean that anyone is particularly more right or more wrong than the other. It's just horses for courses. And I mention it now basically so that you can understand, you can take this information that I'm giving you and you can go absolutely wild with it. You can do whatever you want, completely shape it to your practice. This is an example of how I process images using the smartphone and Photoshop Express app. I will include a video to take you through how I actually make the negative. It is a fairly simple process, but there are these 3 stages that are involved. So in the first stage, I'm taking the original image and I'm creating that to the level that I want it to be. So that would be clarity, sharpness, contrast, and any cropping or reframing that I might want to do, I will do at that point with the original. From the original, I'm then going to completely desaturate and reassess what I want from the image. So once you've desaturated, you might find that actually your contrast has gone down a little bit. And so quite often what you will do is just bump those blacks, bump those whites, and then you'll see that you've got a nice contrasty image for you to work with. And on Photoshop Express, that's labeled as invert. And also on your Photoshop program, it will be also labeled as invert. At this point, your image is going to print out on whether it be acetate or tracing paper. And what you might want to do at this point, sometimes I don't, it just depends on how fastidious I'm being with the work. You might want to flip that negative horizontally so that it's back to front. And you might want to do that because when you print onto the acetate, you're going to want the ink side as close to the paper as possible to ensure that the contact is perfect and that you've got good focus. If you leave it as it is here, you still get an interesting image. It just might not be quite as sharp as you would hope. And here we have from the opposite direction what it looks like as a negative, then how I took it into a black and white edit and onto the original. All of these edits were just done on my smartphone. And usually what I would do if my computer was working is I would send all of these images to my computer and then I would print them out onto acetate using my Laserjet printer. This brings us on to an important question. Laserjet or inkjet? There are pros and cons to both, and I'm going to try and run you through a few of those ideas, and then hopefully that will help you to decide which printer is going to be best for you. Let's start with a Laserjet printer. Laserjet, pros and cons. The pros are they are cheap, the toner is cheap, they're easy to set up and install the inks, and the toners are very hard wearing. I personally use a Laserjet and I'm using it for all of those reasons. Basically, one of the really beautiful points of making cyanotype artworks is that it can be extremely cheap and that allows you to be extremely experimental. The more expensive it is to produce negatives and to do your preparatory work, the more prohibitive that's going to be in the long run because you'll be like, oh, I can't do that because it's going to cost us X amount. Some of the cons for the Laserjet, they can get printer lines quite easily. And I think this is partially because they're not really created for printing images as such. They're created for office work. I'm not bothered, but you might be. Okay, so that's a decision for you to make. I'm not bothered about the printer lines because when it's all together with all of the other facets that I'm doing, you don't even notice them. So again, cons, plastic in the toners. The Laserjet prints by getting extremely hot and essentially fusing a very thin layer of black plastic to either paper or whatever you're printing on. For me, this has worked out really, really well because it means that it's hard wearing. However, in this era of climate change, crisis, and worry, that might be something that you want to take into consideration. I'm continuing to use my plasticized toner because I will reuse my negatives over and over and over again. And then I take them along to workshops for other people to faff about with. So the more hard wearing that negative is, and really not worry about people just, cutting them up, getting fingers into them and all the rest of them. Most Laserjet printers are going to be just a mono printer. So they're only going to have one toner, and that toner is going to be the black toner. That might be good if you're solely going to be printing negatives, which is pretty much what I do. I don't do any home photographic printing. If I want to print a digital photograph, what I tend to do is I'll edit them and I'll edit a full batch and I will send off for commercial printing because you can't really compare with the quality of a commercial printer by using a printer in the home. I mean, I might come under fire for that, but I'm just going to put it out there. Lastly, in the cons, the toner cartridges have to be disposed of safely. So it's not a case of just chucking the toner cartridge into the bin. Again, you need to take that to the tip and you need to get rid of it properly in wherever your council's designated recycling is. Inkjet. The ones that I've got in an example here are actually really, really cheap. So that's good because the initial outlay for the printer might end up being less. So inkjet pros and cons. There's lots of choice for inkjet printers. Like there's so many that literally coming out your wazoo. So you can spend days and days just looking through and figuring out which one has the best assets for you. It does color printing. The inkjet generally a better quality than the Laserjet. Like I say, it's a little bit more lo-fi for Laserjet. And inkjet printers pro, they are all round multifunctional. So pros for inkjet are that it's an all-round multifunctional printer. So you can print your photographs at home if that's what you want to do. In the cons area, you might find that your inkjet printer has expensive inks. So even at that low cost point of entry of £45 or whatever, the inks might then cost you £70 to replace each time. And then that's going to become prohibitive. What you might also find as well is if you forget to switch your printer to grayscale printing when you are making negatives, that it'll actually take all of your CMYK inks to create black, which means you're going to run down your inks much quicker. Inkjet is not as hard wearing, and usually it's water-based inks. So if you are printing on acetate, I've got some friends who then just wash the old negative off and then use it for a new one. So again, that might be something that you want to mess around with. You might want to be able to reuse your acetate if you're going to print onto acetate. I don't reuse it because I print obviously using the Laserjet. So this isn't my setup. However, it doesn't mean to say that it's not an equally as good setup as what I have. As I said, you have to remember to set it to grayscale. And I think over time, your inkjet, because it's got lots of different feeds and, several different inks going into it, it's going to need a little bit more maintenance over time. And that'll include giving it a regular clean. Whereas mine doesn't really need that. I've had mine in use probably since I started my business. So I think the quality is good enough for what I need, and the cheapness allows me the freedom to be super experimental. I don't really think that I need to say anything more than that. If you're having some major difficulty deciding which one is going to be best for you, have a good hard think about the different ways that you're going to want to use it, and then choose according to how you're going to use it. Don't just choose because it says it does amazing photographic quality or 1,000 prints per inkset, because most of the time that's not really true. Acetate or tracing paper, either one will work as a negative. You can see here that this is the film cells from a cyanotype animation that I created. It's old, I haven't taken care of it. It's really quite scratched. It's a bit grubby, but I can still use it. Acetate, pros and cons. Plastic is durable, that's a pro. You can maintain a lot of detail. And it's waterproof if you're using a Laserjet printer like what I use. Cons. Plastic is bad for the environment. There's no way that we can just avoid understanding that plastic is bad for the environment, and we need to try and be as conservative in our use of it as possible. Cons, you need to make sure that you have the right acetate for your printer. Your inkjet printer, so that's the one with the inks, is going to need an acetate that has a very fine coating for the inks to adhere to. And if you don't get the right one, then it just won't stick. Essentially, it'll just come away. You need to get the correct density for the exposures, and this can sometimes be a challenge with water-based inks. I tend to think that they're just a little bit thinner, so sometimes you might want to double print and then layer up your acetates. Finally, the acetate is not waterproof if it's printed in an inkjet printer. So even if it has got that special coating for the inks to bind to, that's not a forever process. If you get a bit of water onto it or you scratch it, it's going to come away. Tracing paper, pros and cons. Pros. Tracing paper is obviously more biodegradable most of the time. Double check what your content of the tracing paper is, just to be on the safe side. Most of the time you can rip tracing paper, which can give you an interesting different edge rather than just having a clean cut. And you can use tracing paper with most printers. When you're in the printer settings, you might have an option that says card, tracing paper, letter, whatever, and then just click on the relevant one, which obviously would be tracing paper, and then go for a print. I think the cons are, and forgive me if you disagree, the cons for tracing paper are that it's not quite as detailed. It can be a little bit easier to damage, so if you bend it, that's going to show up in an image. And finally, some printers might have difficulty feeding the paper through, and that's just finding the correct setting once again. When you're using negatives to print, because you're wanting a perfect contact, really, you want to put it between two planes of glass. One piece of glass on the bottom is going to keep it nice and flat and ensuring that that's a flat surface. And the other piece of glass on the top is going to ensure that you've got an excellent contact throughout the image. Glass over plexiglass. Firstly, better refractive index. And secondly, the glass is going to be heavier. So if you're working outside, it's going to be easier for you to hold everything in place. Dry your chemistry on the paper before applying the negative, especially if you're using an inkjet printed negative, because if you put that on wet chemistry, it's just going to affect your negative. When should I consider getting my negatives produced commercially? Like I say, I am home printing because I love the cheapness of it, so I'm just going wild. If I have a commission and I'm trying to produce a nice large scale print, I will put the money into getting the transparency commercially printed, and that just makes sense. So I'll do all of my tests with my cheap home printing setup. I'll use sellotape and stick bits together, and then once I'm happy, I will order a transparency print from a commercial printer. This is how I go large scale at home. Joiner photography. There's no reason why you can't just print out your image across lots of individual A4 acetate. And then because acetate is durable and completely clear, just use tape to stick it together. Printing big doesn't have to be expensive. This is the stuck together with sellotape joiner photograph printed onto fabric. So it's like an old bed sheet. And then this was used for the side of a lantern during the winter parade. Very quickly, how should I store my negatives? I will hold my hand up and say I am really bad at this, but you don't have to be. You can be better than I am. Any folder will do. I've got so many negatives that they just flee around all over the place, so it's really, really bad. They get scratched, they're not well looked after. You don't have to do that. You can be much more fastidious with your choices. If you've made all the effort to make a beautiful negative, maybe you want to spend the $5.99 and get yourself a folder to keep them in. Can I use a negative with wet cyanotype process or on glass? Just let everything dry to the touch first, okay? So if you are doing wet cyanotype, chuck all your bits and pieces on to your pre-prepared paper, let it dry, then put your negative on top and expose it. Same with using gelatin. Just make sure it's not tacky. You don't want your negative to stick to the gelatin during the exposure process because it's delicate and it's not going to survive that. So do take care and be patient to let everything dry. That was pretty hard going. It's a little bit more technical to do with using software and things like that. So I do understand if you find it a little bit difficult. I am here to help. Just come and find me and I'll do my best to sort you out. Thanks very much for listening once again. And lesson 5 will be with you probably in the next month.